So the movie that I watched was 7 Pounds. The main character is Ben Thomas, whose real name is actually Tim Thomas, but he's using his brother's name and IRS identity to pose as an IRS agent to establish initial trust with other characters within this film. Another important character is Emily Posa, who is a woman with congenital heart failure and a rare blood type who also becomes Ben's love interest. Ezra Turner is also very important in this film. He is a blind man who works at a meat sales company. Connie Tapos is another woman that we meet. She has 2 children and is constantly beat by her boyfriend and needs to get out of the situation but doesn't know how. We also meet George, who is a man with kidney failure and one of Ben's longtime friends. And we also meet Nicholas, who is a boy with cancer who just happens to be in George's hospital. So the initial setting is very mysterious, putting you on the edge of your seat, and it's the first time we see Ben make a 911 call to report his own suicide. Through this initial encounter, we feel nervous and anxious as to what is actually going on and what's happening next, and if Ben really commits suicide or he's just doing it because he needs help. This first scene elicits sadness for Ben because we don't know what or why this is happening, and then it flashbacks to the last month or two, which is basically the whole film. So Ben Thomas is on a mission to change the lives of 7 people in one way or another. Some are strangers and some are people he's known for quite a while. And to do this, he feels as if he must pose as an IRS agent to gain their trust and really discover who they are. He would also develop very important relationships with each of them. So we're taken on this journey with Ben, through which we see the present as well as the past with his fiancée, and we don't initially know what happens to her, but we know that she's relevant to the story in some way. So in the end, we find out that the whole reason that Ben is doing this is because one night he was texting and driving and he got in a car wreck and ended up killing 7 people in a van as well as his fiancée who was in the car with him. This would leave him guilty and depressed for the rest of his life, causing him to impersonate his brother, leave his house, and move to a motel where he would eventually die. He made 3 phone calls, one to his best friend, one to Ezra, and the 911 call that we see at the very beginning of the movie. And this would eventually lead to his suicide. So although it's hard to hear, the way that he committed suicide is very important to the rest of the story. So he filled a tub with cold water and ice, he got in it, and dumped a bucket with water and ice, and also a box jellyfish into the tub. He had learned when he was a child that a box jellyfish was the deadliest jellyfish in the world, and he thought that this would be the best way to die, if you can say that, without harming his vital organs, which he was seeking to preserve. So the jellyfish would sting him and eventually kill him, but the call he made and the ice cold water would preserve his organs so that they could be donated to other people. He also made a sign that said, "Do not resuscitate," so when the EMTs got there, they would not resuscitate him and they would just take him as he is, let him die, and donate his organs to the people that he wanted to help throughout the entire story. So through the depressive crisis that Ben went through, he would eventually find what his purpose might be in life, even if that meant committing suicide. So he would eventually donate everything he could to the 7 people who we met through the entire movie, but only if he thought that they were deserving of it. So to Connie Tapos, the woman who had 2 children and she was constantly beat by her boyfriend, he actually gave her his house, which was very far away from where she lived and nobody could find her. but the only condition was that she never told anybody how she got it. To Nicholas, he would donate bone marrow to help his cancer treatment. To George, he would donate his kidneys. To Emily, he would end up donating his heart because Emily has congenital heart failure and she has a very rare blood type. But Ben also figured out that he had the rare blood type, so he knew he would be a perfect match for her and he would end up saving her life. And then to Ezra, the blind man who works in meat sales, he would donate his eyes so that he could see again. So at the end of the movie, we kind of see Ezra and Emily meeting for the very first time and discovering what their connection was to Ben and kind of like their connection to each other in a sense. So this part of the movie was very emotional for me. I definitely cried. It was a very bittersweet moment between these two individuals, but we knew that they would both live very healthy and happy lives in the end. And as the psychologist throughout the entire movie, the person I would mainly focus on would be Ben, because he is definitely the main character and he seems to have the most psychological problems. So Ben could have chosen a different path completely, but he chose to go on the path that we saw him go on through the entire movie. So the first thing he could have done was face the situation head on, which he would not do. He kept pushing it to the back of his mind, would not communicate to anybody why he was feeling that way or that he was feeling that way at all. Nobody knew. And his brother even reached out multiple times to try to see if he could do anything for him, but he just would not talk to him. He could have also forgiven himself for the things that he did, healed, and moved on with the rest of his life, but he chose not to. And finally, to really just make it so none of this happened in the first place, he could have not been in the car and texting and driving, because that is what killed his fiance and the 7 strangers in the first place. So this whole situation could have been avoided if he would have just put his phone down and made time for work later. With Emily, he could have chosen to love her with honesty and communication, but he chose not to do that. He was not honest about who he was, why he was there, where he was going, what he was doing, anything like that. And he never really communicated with her wholly. He just kind of left her hanging most days, and when she heard from him, she was very happy, but it was not like he had to really make an effort to communicate with her, even though he felt so strongly for her. So in the end, I think that he did do one thing right, and that was love Emily with joy, and she also loved him with joy back. When they were together, it was ultimately both of them just being whole, and it gave them a more meaningful life to live.